Chapter 4. Present Day. Focused on the earth beneath her as she gently waved her foot back and forth over tops of what little vegetation grew in sand just outside of Phoenix, Azita looked for any signs of anomalous activity. The more she searched among cacti, rattlesnakes, and scorpions, the more she felt the story would be just like countless other tips she had investigated, a dead end. Even with finding no evidence of extraterrestrial activity but plenty of teenage partying, Azita loved being in regions that reminded her of when she was a child. Standing with her toes to the edge of a drop-off into Scorpion Lake, it wasn't difficult to imagine the barren mountain range of Iran once she ignored the tree-like cacti towering all around. Taking in a deep breath and slowly exhaling, she could see her father standing next to her, telling stories of how wonderful their country of Iran had been and why they were to speak to no one about the past. At the time, she couldn't understand why he was so adamant about not talking of such things, but after years of education in the best American schools, it became very clear. She felt herself becoming lost in memories of her father. These memories were as clear to her now as the day they had occurred. Her remarkable ability to remember sights, sounds, smells, and touch helped keep her family alive after their death. Though their death was one thing she could not recall. The only thing she was certain of was that they had died. After spending another hour searching for signs of activity, Azita felt it was time to head back before the sun fell behind distant mountains, making it difficult to see in the low light. While continuing to search on her way back to the car, the only unexplained discovery she found was how partying teenagers could have forgotten a case of beer. This tip, like many others she had previously investigated, produced nothing, an experience she had become used to years ago. Glancing down to her watch, Azita began to pick up the pace back to her car. Her employer had sent her to cover Arizona's newly elected governor's swearing-in, but could not resist making a 2-hour trip from Flagstaff to Phoenix after receiving valuable information from her UFO expert regarding sightings of trioptic ships in the area. This wasn't an opportunity she could pass up since her job had placed her in the area, in the hopes that maybe, by some off chance, this one would be different. Now she found herself in a race to board her flight on time, something she swore would not happen since being warned by her editor about side trips and constantly missing flights. Driving down county roads to the interstate, her eyes occasionally looked skyward, always scanning for the slightest sign of something out of place. This didn't just feed her need to keep searching, but also calmed her nerves as she thought about how slowly traffic would be moving on the interstate as she approached. When she turned on the ramp to Flagstaff, she became thankful for the light, fast-moving traffic. She set the cruise control on 75 miles per hour, relaxing a little as she kept one eye on the road and the other to the sky. After she arrived at the airport, Azita hurried to turn in the rental car and sign what paperwork was required before moving to the point she feared most, being delayed by TSA agents who seemed to always find a Persian woman with a last name such as Cartwright suspicious. She stood in line, her shoes in her hands and nothing but her ID in her pocket, and tried not to appear too anxious as she glanced at her watch once again. 10 minutes to take off, she thought as her pulse spiked. If she were to be pulled from the line now, there would be no making her flight. It was now Azita's turn to go through the checkpoint. She was placing her small bag, shoes, and watch on the conveyor belt for the X-ray machine when she saw the time once again. "Damn, 6 minutes!" she muttered, instantly regretting it as she turned and came face to face with the TSA agent working the metal detector. "What was that, ma'am?" the agent asked, squinting slightly. "Oh, nothing. Just thought I didn't have my driver's license. But here it is." Azita smiled and held the license up for the agent to see. She figured that answer wouldn't encourage any further questions. Fortunately, she was correct, and the agent waved her through. Now feeling more relaxed, Azita walked through the X-ray machine, quickly gathered her things from the tub, and rushed toward the gate as she struggled to slip her shoes back on. "Shit!" she exclaimed as vibrations from her small handbag startled her. Slowing her pace just enough to retrieve the phone, Azita had no doubts about who it was. As she pressed the answer icon, a familiar voice asked with a slight wisp, "Anything this time?" It was her personal extraterrestrial information center, Tyler. Azita had never seen Tyler or knew much about him, but every time she heard his voice, she pictured a heavy-set 23-year-old living in his mother's basement. She also knew from things he had spoken of that he lived in Texas, but could not pin down exactly where. "Just an unopened 12-pack of beer with a lot of empties nearby," she said disappointedly, hearing a slight moan from Tyler. "The video I received showed the trioptic hovering in that area, then shooting straight up. It had to be doing something," Tyler said, in what seemed to be an attempt to convince her it had really happened. Beep, boop. Azita could hear call, waiting, alerting her. "Tyler, I have another call, and I am sure this is my editor. We will speak after I land." Without waiting for him to respond, she switched over to Jason as she hurried to the boarding area. "Azita Cartwright, how may I help you?" "Stop screwing around. You on your flight, and where's my story?" Jason responded. Azita quickly tapped at the screen of her phone. "Yes, Jason, at the airport now. Can't believe your call made it through." Click. Azita hit the end call icon, and then she quickly retrieved her report, sending it to Jason with one more press of the screen. With her story on the new governor emailed to Jason, Azita turned off her phone for the flight. Having stayed up the night before writing a story, then driving out to Scorpion Lake for her own investigation, she looked forward to the 6-hour flight home to Washington, D.C. Her nerves began to get a little jittery as she approached the gate, as no one was in the area. Just as she was about to raise her watch and look at it for the 80th time, she heard the announcement, "Final boarding call for Flight 118 to Washington, D.C. at Gate 6. With the announcement, she also spotted a person checking tickets near the boarding corridor entrance. Azita's body relaxed as she held out her ticket, and she was promptly guided down the corridor to the plane. With each step closer to her seat, she could feel the long hours without sleep catching up to her. "Your seat is right here, ma'am." The stewardess pointed as if she were waving her hand at a prize on a game show. Joy came over Azita as she noticed the seat next to her was empty. "Can I get you anything for the flight?" "Yes, a pillow and blanket, please." Instantly, the stewardess turned to retrieve the items as Azita fought to stay awake till her return. Only a few minutes passed between making her request and the items being presented, but it seemed like a never-ending fight with her head bobbing up and down like a drunk that had had 6 too many. Just as Azita covered herself with the blanket and rested her head on the pillow, she fell into a deep sleep. Within moments, movement from the flight caused her most recurring dream to seem more realistic. The dream always began with her looking up to blue skies above, as the sun beat down on her little body and waves rocked the boat beneath her. Azita could feel pain from extreme thirst and cracking lips as the sun did its best to burn through what little cloth she had to shield herself. All around her, as far as she could see, was water, but to drink it would only bring death that much sooner. She recalled stories her father had told her about men stranded at sea, and how some allowed their thirst to overtake them and drank the seawater. He would never go very far into details, but from the horrific look on his face, she understood it was not an option. Having lost all sense of time due to blacking out, little Azita woke to sharp pains from lying far too long on one side. Rolling to her other side in hope of relieving pain from the boat's hardwood floor, she felt something stick her. Believing it was just another splinter, she raised her leg to investigate, only to feel greater pain along with resistance. Wanting to scream from pain, but unable due to her dry throat, Azita curled up in a ball and quickly saw it was not a splinter, but a fishhook that had been lost between the wooden floor planks. Only now she had found it, or it had found her. With small, weak fingers grasping around the hook in her leg and where it grew from the floor, she tried to work it free. Slowly, Azita worked her leg back and forth, gritting her teeth as the hook sliced tissue beneath her skin until the hook came loose from the boards, along with several feet of string. With the hook free from the boat, her first thought was not of being thankful, but of catching a fish, one which vanished as she then thought, "I have nothing for bait, or I would have already eaten it." She could feel the barb of the hook digging deep in her skin each time she attempted to back it out, each time stopping due to extreme pain. Sometimes the pain was so great that she would cry out, but due to dehydration, no tears would fall. Now sick from pain and the hook not coming any closer to being free, Azita grabbed a tight hold and tugged as hard as she could. She screamed in pain, but only a scratching sound made its way past her lips. Never in her life could she recall such pain as when that hook ripped out a piece of her flesh as revenge for her attempts to free herself from it. Looking down at the bloodied hook, she wanted nothing more than to throw it out into the water where it would never be seen again. Then the thought occurred to her, "I am the bait." Pulling the string free from the floor and tying it off to the boat, Azita looked at her flesh and blood still trapped under the hook's barb. Before throwing it over, she thought, "Hope I taste good." The minutes passed with nothing finding interest in her flesh, causing despair to once again creep back over her. As her head lay on the wooden floor plank, her eyes opened wide as she felt a thud different from what had been made by the waves. Fast as she could move, Azita raised to see the string stretched tight, and then felt another thud as something on the hook tried to free itself. With excitement from a catch, she could feel newfound energy coming from deep within as she wrapped her tiny fingers around the string and began to pull. The string was only around 7 feet long, but it seemed a mile long as her little arms pulled at the large fish, fighting to get away. Fear of the line breaking caused strength from deep within her to spring forth as the large fish came near the surface. Spotting an opportunity to grab it in the gills, Azita plunged her hand into the water. The fear of losing her catch grew as she didn't make contact and felt the line slice into her skin. The fish now had another foot of line to fight with. But for Azita, the fight was not over. Pulling with every bit of energy she had, she brought the fish once again to the surface. Holding the string tight and braced to the side of her boat, she found rhythm with waves to make the next attempt count. Just as the wave began to drop away, revealing much more of the fish, she thrusted her hand down, clamping her fingers inside of its gill. Satisfied she had a good grip with her right and releasing string from left, she pushed against the boat rail for leverage to drag the fish from the water. Once again, timing the waves, she waited for the wave to drop the boat, using its downward momentum to pull her catch on board, where it still struggled to get away. Feeling exhaustion quickly taking over, she wasted no time and bit at the fish, but her small, dull teeth could not penetrate his scales. She looked around for something to cut the fish, but found nothing other than a bag containing her crystal from the cave. Just then her eyes widened and she grabbed the crystal from the bag and began to strike the fish till it was dead and easier to eat with chunks of meat revealed. Once the head separated, Azita pulled guts free and placed them in her dry mouth. It took more than a minute for the moisture to soften the tissue of her mouth, but once it had, she was not concerned about how awful the taste was, only relieved for the little moisture it provided. Night came and went, as did the little strength provided from the fish. The next day she felt all life leaving her body and darkness closing in. By the time Azita's eyes reopened, she was no longer in her father's boat, but in a room with shiny wooden walls, a room that seemed to rock gently side to side. Slowly, her eyes scanned the room from the wood to little round windows with sunlight shining through. Then she saw a figure dressed in white enter through a little door. "She's awake! She's awake!" Azita heard a woman call out, but she had no clue what was said, not knowing the strange language the woman was speaking. Still very weak but curious where she was and how she got there, Azita focused on the woman, who was pointing at herself saying, "My name is Ruthie Cartwright." Azita pointed at herself and repeated, only to have the woman laugh at her. Feeling her body being bounced from turbulence, Azita opened her eyes from the dream to find the stewardess standing in the aisle next to her. "We are preparing to land, ma'am," she said with a smile. Still waking from her deep sleep, Azita acknowledged the woman and handed her pillow and blanket over to her while saying, "Thank you very much." Rubbing her sleepy eyes and buckling into her seat for landing, Azita smiled at the memory of when she met her family for the first time.